Back with another reading hour. This is for May 29th, 2025. So we'll pick back right up on the Operation Gladio doc, Unholy Alliance by Paul L. Williams. So yesterday when we left off, we were talking about Colonel Hellowell. The last paragraph I read was Hellowell's idea would result in a union between the U.S. intelligence community and organized crime that would result in conflicts, wars, rebellions, financial upheavals, and an epidemic that would forever alter the flow of world history. Mainstream books about the CIA, like Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes, make no mention of Hellowell, his relationship with Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky, his creation of the Castle Bank in the Bahamas, and his grand experiment on the black community of Harlem. So yeah, that's a great paragraph that we left off on yesterday that ties it all together. Long story short, this Colonel Hellowell worked with Chiang Kai-shek and learned from him that selling heroin could be a very lucrative source of funding, especially for secret operations that you can't make public and therefore can't ask for public funding for. And I guess this is something that was more required in the days before the black budget existed, before you could just hide things as a matter of national security. So we shall see. In the flood of CIA documents released since 1992, one does not find Hellowell's name in the archival indices of the National Archive, the National Security Archive, or the Federation of American Scientists. In the million declassified pages stored and indexed on the website of the Mary Farrell Foundation, Hellowell's name appears only once, on a list of documents withheld from inspection during the CIA's 1974 search for records concerning Watergate. The silence about the principal architect of the post-war CIA drug connection exceeds all standards of eloquence. Let's see. Sorry about that. So I guess they're just saying, he's implying or outright stating it's not a matter of incompetence. He must have been left out intentionally. Within Kunming, a town within the South China province of Yunnan, Hellowell observed that General Chiang Kai-shek's leader of the Kuomintang, KMT, the Chinese National Army, sold opium to Chinese addicts in order to raise funds for his army's planned war against the communist forces of Mao Zedong. Since Hellowell's task was to provide covert assistance to the KMT, what better help could he provide than steady shipments of opiates for the good general? Makes sense. If you see that this is his source of funding, what else can you do but assist him in procuring his product? Hellowell presented this idea to his boss, General William Wild Bill Donovan. Donovan shared it with James Jesus Angleton, Alan Dulles, the OSS Swiss director, and William Little Bill Stevenson, master spy of the British Security Coordination. Delighted with the concept, the officials arranged to funnel money to Hellowell, who now, quote, became the man who controlled the pipeline of covert funds for secret operations throughout Asia. So yeah, he's a very important figure in this indeed. So yeah, it should not go without saying, but it should be obvious at this point that not mentioning him in any of the documents that talk about this or that are official records about this time period is a massive oversight and couldn't just be done by accident. The money for the opiates would eventually come from Nazi gold that had been laundered and manipulated by Dulles and Stevenson through the World Commerce Corporation, a financial firm established by Wild Bill. Now, this is also one of the things that, you will sound crazy if you bring this up. I'll read this one more time. The money for the opiates would eventually come from Nazi gold that had been laundered and manipulated by Dulles and Stevenson through the World Commerce Corporation, a financial firm established by Wild Bill. So now when you start mentioning the fact that the CIA used money they got from Nazi gold, you sound like a madman. Like you sound like a crazy person saying this to anyone, but this is the simple fact of it. They used money that they got from Nazi gold. And then God forbid, if you mention the fact that the Vatican and the Freemasons were involved in this, you start sounding like a crazy person. But this is one of the quintessential things, like how they say in leftist spaces, nothing will make you sound crazier than just stating some things that the CIA has openly admitted to doing. This is one of them. They have openly admitted that they worked with the Vatican, the Freemasons, and sold Nazi gold to fund their operations, both getting people in inner city ghettos addicted to crack cocaine, addicted to heroin, addicted to whatever, to then be able to fund their operations, but also use the drug war to their advantage to expand the oppressive police state. But then mentioned that, yeah, this was all started by their operations to funnel Nazis to protect them after the end of World War II so they could fight communists, and then also conduct clandestine military operations throughout Europe, South and Central America, Africa, again, using these same Nazis and fascists. You start to sound crazy, but again, this is all just right here in this book. But that was still in the future. By the close of World War II, Hallowell and a number of fellow Army intelligence officers, E. Howard Hunt of Watergate fame, Lucien Conein, a former member of the French Foreign Legion with strong ties to the Corsican Mafia, Tommy the Corcoran, a lawyer serving the Strategic Service Unit, and Lieutenant General Claire L. Chanot, the military advisor to Chiang Kai-shek and the founder of the Flying Tigers, had created the Civil Air Transport, or CAT, from surplus aircraft, including C-47 Dakotas and C-46 Commandos. Okay, so they've got access to some pretty heavy-duty aircraft. Sounds like these are some like big carriers that would carry a lot of stuff, and it's left over from whatever they were doing before in the military, and they have access to this stuff, and they're creating basically their own little air force for the purpose of drug trafficking to fund their operations here. The CAT fleet transported weapons to a contingency force of the KMT in Burma. The planes were then loaded with drugs for their return trips to China. The pilots who flew these bush-type aircraft were a motley group of men, often serving as agents or go-betweens with the Chinese national guerrillas and opium buyers. Some were former Nazis, others part of the band of expatriates that emerges in countries following any war. Hallowell and his compatriots had created a model for trafficking in drugs that would result in the formation of Air America, the CIA fleet of planes that transported opiates and cocaine during and after the Vietnam conflict. Thanks to their efforts, Burma's Shan Plateau would grow from a relatively minor poppy cultivating area into the largest opium-producing region of the world. That's crazy. So yeah, I guess before Afghanistan came into the picture, around this time and around these decades, during the end of and after World War II, most of heroin production would have been coming from China. And then when you wonder why Taiwan is so important to the U.S., it's always been a strategic wedge against communist China. So now the section is Ghetto Gold. Let's see if anyone's in the chat here. Nope. Two people viewing though. How are you guys? All right, so Ghetto Gold. Wild Bill had drafted plans to create a post-war Central Intelligence Agency, and knowing this, Hallowell came up with another brainstorm. A surefire means of gaining covert funding for Gladio and other security operations. The new agency, he realized, could obtain cold cash by adopting the same measures as General Chang. It could supply heroin to the black community in America's ghettos. World War II had disrupted international shipping and imposed tight waterfront security that made smuggling heroin into the United States almost impossible. Okay. I don't know if anyone remembers from the movie Sicario, but there's that, I think it was the second one actually, when someone says to Josh Brolin's character, when they're going to tighten up the border because of some kind of event that has happened. I think it's the terrorist event where people were blowing themselves up. The really like racist depiction of a terrorist event they had. But Josh Brolin's character responds that actually tight borders are good for business. It means that the product costs more. Basically just higher margins for whoever's selling. Heroin supplies were small and international crime syndicates had fallen into disarray. But opiates were becoming the rage of the jazz scene in Harlem, and the demand for heroin was increasing day by day among black musicians in New York, where a hit could cost as much as $100. That's crazy. I wonder if that's in like 1950s dollars or today's money. Hallowell, dealing with the drug lords of Burma, was keenly aware of this fact. The notion wasn't out of line with OSS protocol. Hallowell and his army intelligence buddies in China were already involved with providing shipments of opium to General Chang, and with giving, quote, 3 sticky brown bars to Burmese addicts who could offer information about the military plans of Chairman Mao. If similar bars could be made available to inner-city dealers at rock-bottom rates, then the market could be cornered, and the demand made to increase in an exponential manner. Okay, so they're playing the long game. They're trying to like, which has also been the subject of like a lot of different drug related like movies or TV shows where someone tries to get a hold of a particularly good supply and corner the entire market and then use their position of advantage to get some kind of power play afterwards. Wonder where they learned it from. Hellawell knew that a drug epidemic might arise, but he reasoned the problem would remain confined to the lowest strata of society, with little impact on white middle class America. Little did they know. It's also funny that the innovation under capitalism basically just produced more and cheaper forms of heroin, so that it could spread into different sectors of society and different classes. What's going on, Shibbles? Uh, didn't Trump what? Sorry, I didn't look at the chat long enough. And yeah, I don't know what movie specifically, but I feel like that movie American Gangster had a similar plot line where Denzel Washington had like that blue something, and it was like the better. I think they were selling crack in that movie. I can't remember. It's been a while. Um, Also reminds me of just trading places. When anyone tries to corner a market and then make a play after that, it's funny. But here's a real life example, and it's with fascists, Nazi, like literal Nazis, Freemasons, the Vatican, and the CIA. So Hellawell, the son of a prominent English cloth buyer, was a member of the inner circle of the OSS, which became known as the Oh So Social Club, along with other wealthy American dignitaries, including Henry Sturgis Morgan, son of J.P. Morgan Jr., Nicholas Roosevelt, Paul Mellon, son of Andrew Mellon, David K. E. Bruce, Andrew Mellon's son in law, and members of the Vanderbilt, Carnegie, DuPont, and Ryan families. Angleton, as noted, was a Yale graduate and the son of Hugh Angleton, a multimillionaire who owned the Italian franchise of the National Cash Register Company. And I've heard that that's like a notoriously like mob affiliated or corrupt company as well, which not surprising given the people involved. But yeah, this is just like a laundry list of American elite, basically royalty. Like if there was a monarchy in the U.S., it's those families right there. Oh yeah, Sicario. I forgot I'd been talking about that one. Dulles was a Princeton graduate and the senior partner at the Wall Street firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, which represented the Rockefeller Empire and other mammoth trusts, corporations, and cartels. He was also a board member of the J. Henry Schroeder Bank, with offices in Wall Street, London, Zurich, and Hamburg, and a principal of the Bank of New York. Wild Bill Donovan was an Ivy League lawyer, which is also wild. That like, I mean, it's crazy that he's got the nickname Wild Bill Donovan because you picture him as like some kind of like Teddy Roosevelt looking character, like a cowboy hat wearing guy, and he's just like an Ivy League lawyer. So that's kind of funny. But Wild Bill Donovan was an Ivy League lawyer and had married Ruth Ramsey, the heiress of one of the richest families in America. Donovan justified the practice of recruiting the socially elite for the OSS by saying, quote, "You can hire a second-story man and make him a better second-story man. But if you hire a lawyer or an investment banker or a professor, you have something else besides." And so when Hellawell, who was not a second-story man, communicated his idea to the OSS brass, he was assured of a captive audience. Donovan, Angleton, and Dulles viewed Hellawell's proposal as answered prayer. Selling smack to the black jazz subculture would provide U.S. intelligence with a steady supply of revenue for Gladio throughout the post-war era. The Truman administration had set aside no funds for covert post-war operations in the federal budget. So interesting. There was no black budget at all. Nothing you could even call on. I guess they didn't anticipate needing something like that. Which also makes you wonder, like, how far up does that need to go that you need to tell someone, hey, set aside some funds because we're going to be fighting commies immediately after we pretend to defeat the Nazis? And cold cash, Donovan knew, would become the key weapon of the new agency he remained hell-bent on establishing as soon as he got back to Washington. It alone could provide the means to purchase the services of foreign agents, foreign politicians, and foreign assassins without the approval of any elected official. Donovan's reasoning, bizarre as it might seem to modern readers, was shared by most of American political leaders. was shared by most American political leaders, Republican and Democratic alike. At the close of World War II, Alfred W. McCoy explains, Henry Luce, founder of the Time Life Empire, argued that America was the rightful heir to Great Britain's international primacy and heralded the post-war era as the, quote, American century. So yeah, just like coming right out and saying what the Marxists also say, like all the historical materialists, anti-imperialists, the Afro-pessimists, whatever you want to call the people who are talking about neocolonialism and the post-World War II era and the Cold War and what that did to humanity, like how much that has held back humanity from developing by preventing socialist projects, revolutions, movements, whatever, by preventing even basic union organizing in some countries, by preventing even elections of vaguely socialist politicians and parties. Like, yeah, they're just coming right out and saying the U.S. took the place of the British Empire and upheld all the same awful projects and ideology. And they use Nazis to do it. To justify their, quote, entanglement in foreign adventures, American Cold Warriors embraced a militantly anti-communist ideology. In their minds, the entire world was locked in a Manichaean struggle between, quote, godless communism and the free world. The Soviet Union was determined to conquer the world, and its leader, Joseph Stalin, was the new Hitler. European labor movements and Asian nationalist struggles were pawns of, quote, international communism, and as such had to be subverted or destroyed. So yeah, this is where that whole domino theory comes from. They just think that the Soviets and all of the godless commies are out to take over the entire world, which is literally what the West was up to and doing. That was their intent, and they were far more brutal about it, as well as dishonest. There could be no compromise with this monolithic evil. Negotiations were, quote, appeasement. Oh, isn't that wild? Because that's the same thing they're saying about Putin today. Negotiations were, quote, appeasement, and neutralism was immoral. In this desperate struggle to save, quote, Western civilization, any ally was welcome, and any means was justified. So yeah, this stuff never ended. This is all exactly the same rhetoric people are using today. Since any ally was welcome, and any means justifiable, Wild Bill decided the implementation of Hallowell's drug scheme would enable him to make use of Charles Lucky Luciano and the Sicilian Mafia. Don't you love that? You have to deal with the mafia. You have to deal with like the literal worst and most brutal people, in addition to like the Nazis, as if they're not bad enough. You got to deal with the mafia to stop the commies. Anything's better than communism for these people. That's the American ideology. So this section is the commission. Charles Lucky Luciano, born in Sicily as Salvatore Lucania, I guess that's how you pronounce it, Salvatore Lucania, emerged as America's leading mafioso by creating, quote, the Commission with Meyer Lansky, his longtime friend and accomplice in 1931. The Commission eventually governed organized criminal activity within the United States by establishing territorial boundaries, settling internal disputes, and ruling on in-house killings. 12 mafia bosses sat on the board of directors, with Luciano as the head. Interesting. So they got really corporate about it. Again, these are people who are doing some form of almost vanguardism, some form of like party politics. They're organizing the way that businesses would organize, the way that like actual political parties would organize. They're doing things that are effective, even if they are very illegal. Let's see, let me check the chat. Anything going on over here? Shibble says, yeah, it's literally stopping our evolution as a species. Yeah, I shared a meme the other day. It was like a joke graph, and it was talking about Yakub, and it was showing like all these centuries where white expansionism and imperialism held back society from traveling into space, from like doing things to better all of humanity. But it really is the case. Like imperialism holds back all of humanity for the sake of a select few, and most people just simply don't care enough to even understand it, let alone do anything about it. During Prohibition, Luciano and Lansky gained control of the New York docks and Longshoremen's Union by means of muscle and blood in order to supply speakeasies within Manhattan with scotch from Scotland, rum from the Caribbean, and whiskey from Canada. when a bloody war broke out between the families of Giuseppe, quote, the boss Masseria and Salvatore Manzano from 1927 to 1929, Luciano put an end to it by arranging the elimination of both mafia chiefs and laying down the law to survivors. Wow, okay. So there's a war going on for 2 years, and this guy comes in, gets both of the heads assassinated, and then negotiates some kind of peace. Wild move. Wild move. You can just do things. You can just do whatever. Quote, I explained to him that all that war horse shit was out, he later explained. I told him we was in a business that had to keep moving, without explosions every 2 minutes. Knocking guys off just because they came from a different part of Sicily, that kind of crap was giving us a bad name, and we couldn't operate until it stopped. Yeah, mafioso shit. Trying to make it a little more respectable, trying to go legit, but really just trying to get more organized about your brutality and your drug dealing and your trafficking. All right, have I hit, yeah, so that's 20 minutes on the Gladio doc. I'll bookmark it there. The next section we're going to do is heroin and hookers. That's where we'll pick up tomorrow. So now I'll move on to the Western Marxism doc. So yesterday we left off talking about Lenin's foundational critique of petty bourgeois revolutionism, which smacks of or borrows something from anarchism. Includes a perfect summary of Anderson's overall orientation. Quote, the petty bourgeois, driven to frenzy by the horrors of capitalism, is a social phenomenon which, like anarchism, is characteristic of all capitalist countries. The instability of such revolutionism, its barrenness, its liability to become swiftly transformed into submission, apathy, fantasy, and even a frenzied infatuation with one or another bourgeois fad, all this is a matter of common knowledge. Lacerda, we can see here, is clearly following in Lenin's footsteps by redeploying and updating his insightful critiques of petty bourgeois radicalism, a la Anderson. So once again, if that doesn't nail the Western left in a paragraph, I don't know what does. That's basically what this whole book has been so far, is just correctly and scathingly diagnosing the Western left for all its faults. Schivel says, oink oink people. Yes, exactly. Treatlerites. Unlike Anderson and other Western Marxists, Lacerda begins with the primacy of practice and always centers the colonial question. His study of Western Marxism is not an ideological analysis that focuses solely on superstructural elements, nor is it an imminent critique or an ad hominem attack that lambasts these thinkers for their individual ideas. On the contrary, as in his other work, he elucidates the objective forces driving the ideology of Western Marxism, which he sees as a cultural product of the imperialist core. Okay, yeah. That is very much what I have been trying to articulate. I keep thinking of it in terms of, like, imagine if it's some kind of game of tug of war or some kind of any kind of element that involves pushing and pulling in some direction. And it seems to me that when Western Marxists and leftists try to organize and even try to exert any kind of influence on the ruling classes, on the government or the elites whatsoever, they're still pushing or pulling. They're doing one when they should be doing the other, basically. It's like, again, like approaching a door that says pull and you're pushing. It's not going to work because you're exerting the force in the wrong direction. And so when Western leftists try to just extract more of the share of the profits from imperialism, like I'm always saying, trying to get free healthcare, trying to get free college, trying to get whatever, rather than trying to overturn that system of imperialist super profits entirely, they have lost from the start because they're pushing against, they pull a door they're supposed to pull. Schivel says, which is summarizing the reduction of evolution by the capitalist. But yeah, that's there's only so much you can do when you just criticize the individual acts. There's only so much even I can do of saying that mutual aid and protests are ineffective. At a certain point, you have to realize that is a symptom of a deeper issue, and that deeper issue is class politics. It is class analysis, and it is because of people's class position in the imperial core that they can't even conceive of the correct direct action in praxis, let alone have the will to go through with it. Because again, it's not like people don't know what vanguard parties are. It's not like people don't have examples from movies, TV shows, and even real life. It's not like people don't know what the IRA was. It's not like they don't know what the Troubles were about, vaguely even, because there's some movies about that, and they always portray the IRA as the bad guys, but still, you get the idea that these were militant guerrillas who operated in ways to attack the oppressive system they lived under, which involved the government, and they waged this armed struggle sometimes from outside of the country. And people know all these things, but they won't do that kind of thing because of their, again, class position. They're not motivated to. And again, just talking about all this academically, it's totally safe to talk about it academically because I'm just describing the conditions we all live under. Schiebel says this is the vitality of class consciousness. So back to the book here. This is surely one of the reasons why he uses geographic terminology. It is not to imply that all Marxists in a particular region necessarily suffer from the same ideology, which would be reductivist. It is rather that there are very real material forces that foster within the imperialist center a particular ideology that can and should be resisted. Wow, that's brilliant. Exactly. One of the goals of the book, as the subtitle specifies, is precisely to reinvent Western Marxism beyond this anti-socialist ideology. Yeah, this is great. I gotta save that for later because that's perfect. Unlike many of the thinkers analyzed in this work, and in contradistinction to Anderson's glorification of intellectual originality unmoored from practical validity, Lacerdo does not concoct theories out of whole cloth. He also does not indulge in discursive chicanery or proliferate references to the latest theoretical commodities in order to market his work. Yeah, he's not doing grifter shit, basically. That's all just to say, this is like how he's basically like throwing shade at this Anderson guy and describing all the things that Anderson does to grift and self-promote rather than lead anybody in a direction of truth and understanding of Marxism and how to actually tackle capitalism. And then in that same way, by saying Lacerdo does not do those things, he's praising Lacerdo. Love the cleverness here. This is what great writers do, folks. On the contrary, all of his writings are characterized by a sober analysis of concrete reality that is profoundly historical. He clearly sought to understand and learn from material practice in such a way that his theoretical work is first and foremost grounded in the elucidation of the objective world. For it is practice itself that is the ultimate arbiter of truth, not the so-called marketplace of ideas or some imaginary realm of pure thought. I love that. Also fantastic. There was a little while back, I said something in one of my posts, and I said, it's very important that liberals continue to lose to the fascists. Otherwise, it would prove Marxism wrong. And I think I even extrapolated on this more in another post. And I said something like, if protests and mutual aid worked to defeat fascism, then militant force would not be necessary. Vanguard parties would not be necessary. Entire states with armies who fight imperialism would not be necessary if the mutual aid and liberal praxis, if voting, if all of that stuff worked to defeat fascism or imperialism, there would be no need for Marxism. And under one of these posts, I remember a commenter saying, well, damn, I'm not trying to live in an experiment, dog. And I'm like, you always were. That's the whole thing. Like, reality is the ultimate arbiter of what works and what does not. And theory is literally just people writing down a record of that. And people have their different theories. Like, people are more or less dishonest. The people who have capitalist theories are far more dishonest. They're lying. They're literally lying and making things up out of whole cloth. And that's why they have to use silly examples, because they are essentially doing like a religion. But the materialists can be honest. We can talk about the honest history and the material effects of that, and then what that says about the present. Schiebel says he is literally cooking. Yeah, he's cooking with every paragraph here. So now on to the section, Objective Ideological Critique of the Western Left. One cannot live in society and be free from society. The freedom of the bourgeois writer, artist, or actress is simply masked or hypocritically masked. Dependence on the money bag, on corruption, on prostitution. Yeah, and that's a quote of Lenin right there. He was also cooking, of course. In a letter to Franz Mehring in 1893, Friedrich Engels wrote, ideology is a process, which is, it is true, carried out consciously by what we call a thinker. But with false consciousness, the actual motives by which he is impelled remain hidden from him, for otherwise it would not be an ideological process. Hence the motives he supposes himself to have are either false or illusory. Yeah, it's a very intellectual way of saying what I was trying to get at earlier, just a second ago, talking about people who are lying with their ideology because they are grifting or because they believe in a false religion like capitalism. These illusory motives, Engels goes on to explain, are those of pure thought, meaning that the thinker in question assumes that their ideas originate in a conceptual realm, independently of concrete material reality. Like, and that's like the main fantasy of idealism. Like, I always love watching leftists again sit around and theorize about what they want, what they support, and literally they're just like living in the empirical core, supporting the empirical core, supporting imperialism. Like, that's what they're doing. What they say they support with their feelings is a whole different story, but that has no bearing whatsoever on reality. Schill says you are nothing and everything at the same time. It blew my mind one time. I was literally working in a grocery store, and another guy that I worked with, he's like, I'm a Buddhist. All we have in life are our actions. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, nobody knows what you think. Nobody knows what your motives are. Nobody knows how kind of a person you are. They only know how you act outwardly, like with your actions. That's all we have. And I was just like, I was like younger. I was like 20. I'm not. I must have been like, I'm not gonna say how old I was. It just blew my mind. I was too old to be having a realization like that. Rejecting this idealist approach, he proposes instead a materialist analysis of the objective forces that condition one's subjective thoughts while simultaneously impeding one's conceptual apprehension of said forces. So I guess that's just a way of describing the self-delusion that people have to engage in to justify their class analysis of everything. So again, I'll read it. Rejecting this idealist approach, he proposes instead a materialist analysis of the objective forces that condition one's subjective thoughts while simultaneously impeding one's conceptual apprehension of said forces. So you basically have to step outside of yourself and understand things objectively. You have to like make the mental and conscious effort to do that. This account of ideology as false consciousness is central to Lyserdo's work. In a telling passage in one of his books, he invokes Christopher Columbus's plan to reach the East Indies by sailing west from Europe as a useful metaphor. Is that like the only way out is through, I guess? Although the Italian explorer's subjective aspirations were to discover a western passage to the East Indies, the objective nature of the world made it such that he actually landed in the West Indies. From a dialectical point of view, subjective thoughts always need to be situated within the objective material world. The latter is primary, as the example of Columbus shows, since his subjective will could not bend objective reality to it. However, the relationship between these two dimensions is dialectical. It's dialectical, you see. They mutually inform one another because our apprehension of objective reality is itself mediated by subjective factors. Columbus thought the world was different than it actually is, insofar as we currently understand it. Ultimately, there is no God's eye view, so any apprehension of objective reality is mediated by subjective experience, which is itself conditioned by this very same reality. So that is very dialectical. There is no like objective vision of anything. You can't actually view any of this or understand any of this without your own personal bias and your subjective contribution to that. But also, the reality informs that just as your subjective perception informs that. It's dialectical. Lyserdo's analysis in this book seeks to bring to the fore the objective social forces that have produced Western Marxism as a remarkably consistent ideology in imperialist countries, as well as in class strata in the periphery that aspire to imperialist rewards. At the same time, it eschews mechanical explanations or reductivisms in favor of a complex and nuanced account of the dialectical play of forces between subjects and objective reality. I like that. This is the actual way to use nuance and to have nuance and to use the word nuance. Not just to defend why you would vote for Kamala despite the genocide. Sheila says, this is your normal everyday person struggling in capitalism today. Yes, subjects of the ideology. This is attested to, among other things, by the fact that Lyserdo himself was a Marxist working in the Western world, who critically diagnosed and rejected its dominant ideologies in favor of supporting the anti-colonial struggle to build socialism. Yeah, again, like someone living in the Western world who rejects, yeah, critically diagnosed and rejected its dominant ideologies. It's very difficult to do. It's literally breaking free from the matrix, not making a bunch of money so you can retire early. Lacerda draws extensively on V.I. Lenin's resounding diagnosis and trenchant indictment of chauvinism and racism in the socialist movement within imperialist states. Ain't that the truth? Many of Lenin's searing critiques of revisionism, meaning the gutting of Marxism's revolutionary core, center on a condemnation of the social chauvinism that plagued European members of the Second International from 1889 to 1916. The Bolshevik leader criticized as opportunists those who supported the First World War, lining up on the imperial agendas of their national bourgeoisies against the interests of the global working class. In his 1915 text on the quote collapse of the Second International, he explained, quote, by social chauvinism, we mean acceptance of the idea of the defense of the fatherland in the present imperialist war, justification of an alliance between socialists and the bourgeoisie and the governments of their quote own countries in this war, a refusal to propagate and support proletarian revolutionary action against one's quote own bourgeoisie, etc. It is perfectly obvious that social chauvinism's basic ideological and political content fully coincides with the foundations of opportunism. It is one and the same tendency. In the conditions of the war of 1914 to 15, opportunism leads to social chauvinism. The idea of class collaboration is opportunism's main feature. So, yeah, and you see plenty of situations where people will side with their own government because it feels more comfortable rather than the international working class, or even some kind of movement that would benefit the international working class, even if it seems like it's indirect or roundabout, or their own government has indoctrinated them against it because it's obviously against their own imperialist government's interests. Lenin not only critiqued social chauvinism among European workers, he also identified its material basis in the imperialist world system. In his 1916 essay on imperialism, which set much of the political agenda for the Third International, he argued that the imperialist extraction of monopolist super profits from peripheral societies had created a labor aristocracy among the European working class, resulting in their embourgeoisement. Resulting in their embourgeoisement. That is, their identification with the interests of their own national bourgeoisies, over and against those of their fellow proletarians in other countries. And yeah, that's exactly what I mean when I say people will choose to struggle for more of the super profits for things like free healthcare rather than trying to liberate the people in the sweatshops that are making all of their stuff. Those two goals are absolutely at odds. Like, you can't claim to be fighting for the national proletariat, for the international working class, for the people in the global south, if you're also fighting to extract more of the imperial super profits for yourself personally. Those are two different stances. Lenin's foundational elucidation of imperialism's tendency to exacerbate uneven development and the stratification of the global working class, as well as his insistence on the right of nations to self-determination, have served as a basis for countless subsequent analyses that seek to identify the material foundations of racism and chauvinism. It should be noted, moreover, that his theorization of dependency, superexploitation, and the regional differentiation of labor has also been widely used to analyze racialized social and labor hierarchies that obtain within single nation states, including in what has been subsequently identified as internal colonialism. Interesting too. Yeah, we don't think about that enough. That there are like people talk a lot about like black nationalism, but there is that idea that there are nations within nation states that are oppressed and colonized internally. And again, that's why those are the people who should be leading any kind of vanguard party. It should be the people who are the members and representatives of that oppressed national class. Shibble says horns. I'm almost at 40 minutes, so then I'll switch over to the other book in just a minute. I'll do a couple more paragraphs here. Lacerda demonstrates how the social chauvinism of many Western Marxists expresses itself in paternalistic attitudes toward the efforts of workers and peasants in the peripheries to struggle against imperialism. Like Lenin, he situates this condescending mindset as a legacy of the Second International, whose material basis is found in the socioeconomic relations of the imperialist world system. Those who enjoy wages of imperialism are more likely to have disdain for or disinterest in the complex struggles for national liberation in the periphery, which is dismissed as, quote, the savage barbarism of the East. In the choice words of Max Horkheimer, which equally represented the views of his close collaborator, Theodor Adorno. Yeah, so Horkheimer is good. Adorno, I've heard great things about. All great theorists who talk about things like world systems theory. There was another recent episode of a podcast I like, the JD Pod. I think they just did a series or at least one episode on world systems theory. So I'm going to bookmark this one here. And now we will switch over to the Busy Worker's Handbook to the Apocalypse. So we left off yesterday talking about different types of heat energy and talking about how ice reflects a lot of energy from the sun, whereas water absorbs it and creates a lot more heat. So as ice melts, that is one of the feedback loops that creates overheating. Schiebel says principality is a term still in use today. Yeah, also true. Part of the nationalism thing I was talking about. All right, so now on to the Busy Worker's Handbook. Kevin Pluck is a data visualization pro who created a web interface where you can interrogate ICE data and generate graphics. I highly recommend following Kevin on Twitter, that's Kevin Pluck, and utilizing the visualization tools available on his website. So we have like a really cool graph here, Arctic Sea ice extent. So you can see that there are times where it goes down and comes up, but when it's coming back up, it's not getting to the peak that it had before. So it's an overall decline. One might think from looking at the graph above that it took 40 years for Arctic ice to fall by 50%, so it should take another 40 years to hit zero, right? This is incorrect for several reasons. First, the warming rate has increased dramatically in recent years and will continue increasing, see section 5.2. The jet stream has been essentially broken since 2020, see section 6.4, with polar vortex systems wandering deep into North America and Siberia, and warm systems wandering directly over the pole. Also, as ice melts, it loses volume and becomes thinner. Shrinking the area of a thick ice cap by 50% takes an enormous amount of energy. Melting the wafer-thin remainder is much easier. I didn't draw the submerged ice in the graphic below, but it would share the same basic proportions as the above water ice. There's a nice graphic here. 50% of ice area, 50% volume of ice. It's just to elucidate the point he was making before. So basically just saying it's bad to lose ice, and then it also creates the feedback loop like I was discussing for several reasons. Not just the absorption of heat and energy, but also the volume. So I guess that's something that will contribute very much to flooding. Overall, there is almost no ice over 4 years old remaining. It now comprises just 3% of the total ice cover. This contrasts starkly with the late 1980s when 30 to 35% of the Arctic Ocean's ice was older than 4 years. Ice extent or area is easy to observe with satellites. You will most often see ice extent referenced in Arctic news, and it is easy to make the mistake in thinking that ice extent should decrease linearly. If ice volume decreases linearly, then we should expect ice extent to decrease exponentially. Accelerated warming exacerbates this even further, so it is entirely reasonable to forecast an ice-free September within the next few years. It is a tremendous error for Arctic news to focus on extent or area over volume and thickness. Excellent animation of loss of ice volume here, and there's another hyperlink. Ice volume data and graphics are available here. Looking at the graph below, zero Arctic summer ice in the near future becomes much more easily imaginable. So then this is another graph that basically exaggerates that trend I was talking about before. It's like a sine wave, but the later peak does not reach the previous. So it's an overall decline. Aircraft contrails, section 2.5. The primary mechanism by which CO2 and other anthropogenic GHGs cause warming is through a water vapor feedback. Basically, CO2 warms the atmosphere a bit, which allows it to hold more water vapor, and the increased water vapor causes even more warming. Aircraft contrails don't increase the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, but they mimic the same effect by causing perturbations that condense water vapor into cirrus clouds. The increase in high altitude cirrus clouds caused by global aviation creates a temporary warming effect. This 2021 study found, quote, contrail cirrus yields the largest positive net warming, ERF term followed by CO2 and NOx emissions, and that even after subtracting out the cooling effect of sulfate aerosols from jet exhaust, the non CO2 contrail warming still outweighed aviation CO2 warming. Aircraft contrails are one of the few factors that will yield a small cooling effect after the collapse of civilization, but will be far outweighed by the broader loss of air pollution aerosols, next section, which will cause significant warming. So, yeah, I was discussing yesterday some of the feedback loops that are ironic because it's as there will be some kind of event that causes mass death or mass loss of humanity in some way, um, the result in the loss of human activity that causes carbon burning and causes fossil fuel and the things that cause warming, those decrease, but then some of those actually cause the planet to warm faster because they were staving off some of it. And so the only solution again would be to, like, in some kind of globally managed way, decrease the carbon and the burning of the fossil fuels and everything that's causing the warming to prevent that scenario before those catastrophic events happen. But since that has not happened and is not even being proposed, we are pretty much headed straight into the catastrophic events and then the feedback loops that result from there. So section 3, cooling factors, and section 3.1, aerosols. I can recall hearing the term, quote, global cooling for the first time in the early 2000s, and I immediately dismissed it as right-wing climate denier propaganda and never looked into it. The fossil fuel industry made a point of emphasizing global cooling. See section 7.1. Oh yeah, I'm sure there's going to be several sections about the amount of propaganda that has gone into obscuring and hiding all this stuff. Turns out it's an important feature of climate science, and ignoring it may be the biggest mistake we ever make. The simplest way to present this is that there are some results of human industrial activity that create warming influences, and some results that create cooling influences. When you add them all together, you get the net impact on climate. See chart on the right. In the chart on the left, you can see several types of aerosols listed: stratospheric, tropospheric, and indirect effects. These are essentially air pollution, with two of the biggest sources being coal-burning electrical power plants and diesel exhaust. Okay, so we have the two charts on the left. Again, you'll have to just check the live stream, check the link in the show notes if you want to follow through to the actual link. It's hard to relate a lot of these charts in audio form. Sorry, folks. Air pollution kills millions of people every year, approximately 100,000 in the US alone. It has been estimated that fossil fuel air pollution is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths globally, pre-COVID. Sulfates and other pollutants also cause acid rain. At the same time, those suspended air pollution particles, aerosols, make cloud tops brighter, creating a reflective shield in the atmosphere that bounces incoming solar radiation back out into space. This shielding effect protects us from as much as half of global warming. That's crazy. So aerosols that we are putting in, we're already, and that's another thing people keep talking about, is like doing these man-made wide-scale solutions to this, like creating some kind of layer in the atmosphere intentionally that reflects heat. Yet to see any of this be implemented, but I'm sure someone, probably like a grandchild of Elon Musk, will be involved in it. No, it won't take that long. It'll probably be like him himself. We have another chart. It's like a steady, pretty much 45-degree angle chart of observed global temperature, GHG warming, and aerosol cooling. And the aerosol cooling creates these spikes up and down, but it still follows in that 45-degree upward trend overall. Hansen refers to this as our Faustian bargain. Because we've essentially sold out our future for short-term gains, the critical point to identify here is that unlike greenhouse gases, aerosols do not persist in the atmosphere. As soon as we stop creating air pollution, the normal cycles of cloud formation and precipitation will wash the aerosols out of the atmosphere within months. Eventually, modern civilization is going to collapse. When that happens, the aerosol masking effect will end immediately, and an already catastrophic situation will become orders of magnitude worse within a single year. Okay, so yeah, the aerosol masking effect is a huge thing. What is that movie? I want to say it was like, I know the Guy Christensen. He's like the doctor that I did a live stream with Chris Jeffries at one time. He recommended some movie. It was like The Name of a Bird or something. Finch is the one. So apparently there's a movie that's free on YouTube called Finch, and it explains this aerosol masking effect. I still haven't watched it because I understood what he was talking about, but this is exactly what I was saying just a bit ago. There are certain things that humans do with our activity, and then once we are gone because of this collapse, it will cause feedback loops and even worse collapse. So Shibble says, "Can't wait to be in charge to be charged to refill my oxygen tank." Yeah, no, we're not going to get anything that utopian. We will just be dead. Let's see. Yeah, so that aerosol masking effect will make things drastically worse within a single year. Awesome. The danger of this cannot be overstated. So before I actually go on, I think that's probably our only hope is some kind of man-made, more benign aerosol mimicking thing, right? Possibly something that goes a little further than the aerosols do and will stay rather than falling out with, or they have to keep putting it in the atmosphere. Something that they invent and then have to keep putting in the atmosphere to mimic the effects of the aerosol and replace it to avoid such a feedback loop, which we can hope for. It's like our only hope is that someone, hopefully China, is able to do that on such a mass scale that they can industrially put this into the atmosphere globally to prevent like a catastrophic feedback loop. The danger of this cannot be overstated. As soon as economic activity collapses, global warming will increase by as much as a full 1 degree Celsius. The paragraph below is exerted from the IPCC AR6 WG1 report. ESM is Earth System Models, GSAT is Global Surface Air Temperature, SLCF is Short-Lived Climate Forcings. Note that the warming caused by loss of aerosols begins immediately, with an accelerated rate of warming lasting for several years. So here's the quoted section here. As a consequence, in idealized ESM studies that assume an instantaneous removal of all anthropogenic or fossil fuel-related emissions, a rapid change in aerosol levels occurs leading to large increases in GSAT, global surface air temperature, with the rate of warming lasting for several years. Similarly, thermal inertia causes the pulse emissions, figure 6.15, of SLCF, short-lived climate forcings, to have significant effect on surface temperature, even after 10 years. In summary, for SLCFs with short lifetime, e.g. months, the response in surface temperature occurs strongly as soon as a sustained change in emissions is implemented and continues to grow for a few years, primarily due to thermal inertia in the climate system. High confidence. Near its maximum, the response slows down, but will then take centuries to reach equilibrium. High confidence. For SLCFs with longer lifetimes, e.g. a decade, a delay equivalent to their lifetimes comes in addition to the delay due to thermal inertia. It's a typo there, sorry. High confidence. Yeah, so they're just describing the effect of that feedback loop, and from what I can gather from reading that is that you'll have these events where the temperature drastically changes globally in the span of a couple months, and then cycles between uh, higher or lower temperatures as some kind of uh, what do they call it, like equilibrium is trying to reach, I guess. Um, which I can only assume means that that's what's going to cause the total collapse of the biosphere, because it will prevent plants from growing. And once you have like plants being unable to reliably grow, that collapses various different ecosystems. Not good, folks. Very not good. I find myself saying that a lot when I'm reading this one. In 2018, the International Maritime Organization, IMO, passed a new rule on shipping fuels aimed at reducing air pollution. The rule specifically targeted sulfur emissions and came into force in 2020. It aims to reduce maritime shipping SOx emissions by 77%. Excellent discussion and graphics on IMO shipping fuel changes here by Simons. There's also a hyperlink, a couple of the hyperlinks in here, and another great discussion by Simons critiquing the newly released IPCC AR6 synthesis report (SPM) for failing to mention cooling effects of sulfates. Quote, worse than nothing. So he's saying like whatever they did in this report is worse than doing nothing. Interesting. And there's a screen cap of a tweet here. For decades, this area has been kept relatively cool by sulfur emissions from ships, but this changed in 2020. And it's just a red bar circling from the northeast of the U.S. Or no, sorry, from the entire U.S. Um, to where Japan is and some of like the northeast of China, and then all the way over to Eastern Europe, basically. Hmm. Similar strong efforts to combat air pollution have occurred recently in China and India. The results of these reductions in air pollution will save lives and improve air quality, but will rapidly increase observed global warming and make near term collapse all the more likely, after which point billions will die of starvation. Wow, wild. So, because China and India are making such materially significant efforts to combat air pollution, that's actually going to exacerbate global warming in the short term and likely cause like billions of people to die of starvation because we can't grow things. Section 3.2 Volcanoes. Volcanoes are the largest non anthropogenic source of cooling aerosols and are capable of moderating temperatures for several years after a large eruption. Aerosols from volcanoes tend to last longer in the atmosphere than anthropogenic aerosols because volcanoes launch the aerosols to higher altitudes in the stratosphere, where they are not exposed to clouds and the precipitation and take longer to filter out. The effects of the 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines can be seen in the blue temperature line on the graph at the start of section 2.3. So it's got four globes here. Global effects of Mount Pinatubo. Uh, hmm. Not really sure exactly what to make it. You'll have to look at it yourself, folks. I don't feel smart enough to speak intelligently on it. Volcanoes aren't necessarily always helpful, though. In 2022, the underwater Hunga Tonga volcano erupted at 150 meters below sea level, blasting an enormous amount of water vapor into the stratosphere. This caused a small warming rather than cooling effect. Okay, interesting. Section 3.3 is geoengineering. So, yeah, this is what this is again, our only hope is to try to come up with some man made solutions to some of these things. If we can create climate cooling impacts on accident, can we also do it intentionally? Okay, so he's anticipating everything, of course. That is the goal of geoengineering, and various ideas have been floated ranging from simple surface mounted mirrors, MEER explainer video, there's a link there, to complex stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, to over the top, freezing the Arctic and Antarctic, and many others. So far, no governments have expressed any serious interest in pursuing these. The US government recently published a 5-year assessment plan to develop a report on climate intervention. You may notice all of the links in this paragraph are of the quote, new bright idea, or more research is needed for ID, which would have been appropriate 30 plus years ago, but certainly not today when we stand on the actual brink of global catastrophe. Saudi Arabia last year launched a cloud seeding program, but this small scale effort is aimed at mitigating water shortages rather than altering climate and will likely have a net warming impact. Okay, so also great news. The little climate action that is being done is just to tackle specific areas where they desperately need some water. So, yeah, governments as usual will do the absolute least possible to maintain whatever order they can and let people die in the meantime. Shul says looks like it's related to agriculture and livestock production. Yeah. The risks of various geoengineering schemes are wide and varied, with great uncertainty as to the nature and magnitude of possible unintended side effects. Side effects which could cause problems outside the borders of the nation or state that implemented the program. Hansen writes in Climate Change in a Nutshell, quote, some level of geoengineering may be necessary as the world continues to drag its feet on addressing climate change, but geoengineering can and should be minimized. Other groups of scientists have also spoken out against geoengineering, but the time may soon come when conditions are so dire that nations will be willing to accept the risks for any small amount of cooling. Yeah, it seems like we're getting closer and closer to that point. So, net zero and other myths. I'll just read a little bit of this because I'm getting close to the end for the day. Section 4.1 Some relevant acronyms. A short glossary to clarify several very similar sounding terms. ECS is equilibrium climate sensitivity, is the eventual temperature that will be caused by a doubling of atmospheric CO2 from pre-industrial level of 280 parts per million, including only fast feedbacks, generally taken as occurring around the year 2100. By including the CO2e of other greenhouse gases, we are currently already at this level. See end of section 2.2. In short, if we suddenly stopped all CO2 emissions right now, ECS is the temperature we would reach by about the year 2100. ESS, Earth System Sensitivity, is basically the same thing, but includes all the slow feedbacks fully playing out. The exact time is less certain, but can be assumed to take around 1000 to 1500 years. EEI, Earth Energy Imbalance, is different than the previous two terms. ECS and ESS can be thought of as, if I turn up the stove burner from low to medium, how hot will the water in a pot eventually get? EEI is a measure of how fast is the water heating up. And as long as EEI is greater than 0, it means the planet is warming. A larger EEI value means the planet is warming faster. ECS and ESS tell us where we're going. EEI tells us how fast we're getting there. ECS and ESS are expressed as a temperature in degrees Celsius, while EEI is expressed as a radiative forcing imbalance measured in watts per square meter, or W over m squared. W over m squared can seem a bit abstract, so you may see the current EEI expressed as the energy equivalent of 12 atomic bombs per second, or over a million per day, all day, every day. Wow, okay, cool. The energy equivalent, though, not obviously not the radiation. So, all right, well, I'm going to bookmark it there. I'm at an hour for the day. So section 4.2 tomorrow will be, what does the IPCC say? All right, so thank you, Chivalrous, for joining. Thank you, everyone else who watched or will watch after this published on YouTube. But again, look in the description for the links to all the documents that I'm reading. Look in the links on the profile of the Turn Leftist 2050 or 2035 meme page for links to the Discord or other relevant links. This should all be hopefully going out on Twitch, on TikTok, on YouTube, and on Instagram on 2035. So hopefully that's the case, but it's always going to be up on YouTube the day after, at least. It takes like a day for the live videos to show up for some reason. Also, I'm experimenting a little bit with the microphone. I'm trying different distances and volumes. I want to get the right equilibrium of being far enough away from the mic that you don't get all my like slobbery mouth noises that are gross, but also that you can hear everything I say, and then try to adjust the levels in post-production. But it'll be a work in progress. Hopefully it gets better every day. So give me some feedback, people. Let me know. All right, I'm going to end it here.